Hey guys, welcome to the Conversations with Interesting People podcast, the show where we sit down with people from all walks of life and hear their story and their journey and hopefully inspire you along your own journey as well. And I'm incredibly honored today to have our guest. He's a ACU alum. I learned this recently that he's also the 1991 Mr. ACU.
Oh, wow.
But most importantly, most impressively, he is the president of ACU, Dr. Phil Schubert. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be here. You know, there's some things you just soon kind of forget about, but thanks for reminding me.
In fact, I wanted to remind you even more because I brought the newspaper clipping. I wanted you to just take a look.
Oh, wow.
Look at that. Do you remember that?
There's Deanne Kamali, Miss ACU, and I look like I'm about 11.
Yeah, you look like a young man. You haven't aged a bit. I'll tell you that right there. You look like the same man from this 1991 news clipping. Anyway, I found that, and I was like, I've got to bring that up. That's amazing.
That's great. No one's mentioned that in a while.
I've accomplished my job, did my research. We can wrap it up. No, but I'm really glad you're here. And what I really want to dig into for this episode is really, there's Dr. Phil Schubert, president of ACU, the public figure that everyone gets to see in the newspaper or online or when any big announcement from ACU comes up. There's that public figure on stage giving a speech. But really, I wanted to dive into Phil Schubert, the man, and kind of just hear your journey to how you got to where you are today and the ups and downs and all the messy parts and beautiful parts, and just hear your story. But before we get to like the ACU part, I want to hear more about like the origins of Dr. Phil Schubert. Like, how did you get to where you are today? You
know, sometimes people ask, how do you get to become a college president? And I tell them, well, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Something just happens. You know, this has been an amazing journey for me. I grew up in a family where my mom, my dad, and two older brothers, I was the youngest of three, all attended ACU. So I watched them come out here. I came out, stayed in their dorm rooms, visited, you know, had all the sense of everything ACU was about.
Yeah.
And so when it was time to go to college, I was ready.
Okay.
And I knew this place like the back of my hand, and it was a great experience. And I had what I typically tell people, I had the best experience anybody possibly could have had at ACU.
Okay.
I found people who believed in me, who challenged me, who encouraged me, and found things in me that I had no idea that I was capable of. And I found my faith. I even though I grew up in a faith family with a father and mother who were very devout Christians and who instilled in me Christian values, it wasn't until I came out here and began to live on my own, which I think is true of a lot of young people, that until you have that chance to really live on your own, your faith doesn't necessarily become your own. When you have that independence and you begin to make those decisions without mom or dad looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
And so this was such a formative time in my life. And so to be now in a role where I get to help facilitate creating and enabling that type of experience for other students, it's the best job in the world. Yeah. It's not always easy, but it's the best job in the world. So I studied accounting here. Left and went to work at Arthur Anderson in Dallas. Actually came back to let my wife at that time finish school at ACU with no intention to be here longer than for her to finish. She wasn't going to lose her Bible credits if she came to ACU. We got married after her sophomore year. I was working at Arthur Anderson. We left, came back, let her finish, and wouldn't you know it, I never left. I came back with the idea that I was going to take the LSAT, get my CPA, and go be a tax attorney and work on mergers and acquisitions.
Wow,
that was the plan.
That sounds thrilling.
Yeah, it's thrilling. At that time, I thought it was really exciting. But I got here, and we began to love Abilene. I had some opportunities. I worked for a guy by the name of Jack Rich, who's now our chief investment officer. He was our executive vice president for a long time. I really hit it off with Jack. He was a great mentor to me. He gave me opportunities to learn and grow. And all of a sudden, I was looking at this situation thinking, I love it here. And I could see myself carrying on a career. I did go ahead and take the LSAT, applied to law schools, got accepted at Baylor, and had made plans to attend. And it was really in the car leaving Dallas, Texas, going to new student orientation in the summer before I was to start law school. And I said to my wife, I'm not sure I want to do this. And she said, me neither. And we turned the car around and came to Abilene, and I've been here ever since. And I've had, 6, 8 different jobs.
That's crazy. So let's go back a little bit. I want to dive maybe more into your faith journey, especially when you say that how leaving home and coming on your own was important and integral for your faith and growing that. What did that specifically look like for you? How did that change for you? Were there integral people? Was there specific classes, professors? I mean, what did that look like for you?
I think all of the above.
Okay.
So I think the first thing I would note is when you're living independently, you don't have those structures and routines necessarily that you grew up with in your home. And so there's a lot of variability in your decision making. You know, when are you going to get up?
Yeah.
When are you going to go to bed? Who are you going to hang out with?
Yeah.
What are you going to do when you're alone in your dorm room? What are you going to read? So all of a sudden you're in this situation where as an independent individual, you're making constant decisions that get to the heart of your character and who you want to be.
Yeah.
And so in those spaces, I was also being filled with what I was hearing in class, very, great messages, character building messages. I was meeting people. One of the biggest influences on my life when I was a student here, two, Gary McCaleb and Bob Strader.
Okay.
Two guys who took a personal interest in Phil Schubert.
Yeah.
And they were at a place in life where they could really invest in me and were gracious to do so. I don't know why they thought this would be a good use of their time, but they did. And so I had people who were asking me probing questions about, who do you want to be and what kind of difference do you want to make and what's important to you in life.
Yeah.
And so all of those type of situations, the freedom, the content of what was happening, conversations on this campus in my classes, the friends that I was making, as well as the mentors that I was able to develop relationships with, all had a big role in helping me gain clarity.
Yeah.
At some point, I began to emerge and think, okay, I know who I want to be, how I want to be, what I believe about God, his personal relationship with me and how that looks in life, and how I need to facilitate and grow that every day and the commitments I want to make to being a person who's about the journey to be closer to God tomorrow than I was today.
Yeah. For you in that journey, do you feel like you had, because you talked about these men who are mentors in your life, and I feel like that's almost a lost art in today's world. Do you feel like maybe that was more of the culture back then where it was normal for young men to look at older men as mentors, or do you feel like that was just the drive of Phil Schubert? I wanted to find guys who were well ahead in the path than I did and learn from them, or was it more on the initiative of their side? They saw something in you and chased you down.
That's a great question. I think it's probably more the latter. I wish I'd had the foresight as a young man to really pursue. I think I was open to it. I think I was really at a place in life where I recognized the opportunity to grow. And so when I came across an opportunity that I thought would help facilitate my growth and maturity, I think I was very receptive to it. And God tends to bring people into your life when he creates an openness to do that. And it's quite frankly, I don't know. It's a good question as to whether or not that was something that was more a part of our culture in the past, or if that's still present day. It's the number one piece of advice that I give young people. So when students at ACU and others sit down and we have a conversation, sometimes they'll ask, what advice do you have? The first piece of advice that I give always is find some great mentors. Because I completely believe that that's one of the most important things for all of us. And mentors are not just for young people. I still have mentors today, and I hope I have mentors till my last day on this earth, with people who've experienced a different part of the journey, who've been down the road further than I have, that can give their wisdom. There's absolutely no substitute. You hear the phrase, there's no substitute for experience. I completely believe that in every aspect of life, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's marriage, whether it's a business, you name it. You can't learn everything you need to know by studying something. You have to experience life, and there are always people in life that have experienced a little more than each of us.
Today's culture seems a little interesting in the fact that it almost seems like a lost art, where people are mostly looking at their peers to be influenced rather than looking at someone older. Hey, how can I grow? How can I get up? So that's amazing. That's huge to hear that from you. That was an enormous part of your own faith journey out there, especially for us who are still growing or still...
And I believe that's part of the DNA of ACU. Like, if you look around this campus, I think you'll find, for lack of a better phrase, more per capita people interested in being mentors than anywhere else on the planet. I mean, we attract faculty and staff to this place that have a deep desire to share from their own experience in ways that are beneficial and formative in the context of helping someone build their faith and better understand who God has called them to be on this campus and anywhere else in the world, in my opinion. And I love that. I think that makes for an amazing experience for most ACU students that are open to sharing of themselves and being willing to engage in some of those relationships.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I love this. It also isn't like a plug or paid advertisement for ACU, but I love that it's just like so in you to be passionate about what's going on and the things that you're involved at. So that's awesome. I want to fast forward from your faith journey here to, okay, so now you're at that fork in the road. Do I go to Baylor? Do we go back to Abilene? I want to kind of dive into maybe how did your faith play a role in that decision? Was it a voice of God coming down and be like, hey, that's not where you need to go? Or was it a like internal, I don't feel comfortable with that? How did your faith play a role in maybe those turning points in your life and those decision points that you had to make?
Yeah, I've had several key decision points, to use your term, in my life that I would consider significant. That one was a big one. I don't know that one was heavily influenced by my faith.
Okay.
It was more of a practical decision. I guess in some ways maybe it was, because I felt like I was doing something here that had a lot of meaning.
Okay.
So I felt like I was in a role where I was really contributing, and I felt valued and appreciated for that contribution. I felt like that if I chose to stay here, that those opportunities would continue.
Okay.
To come to me. And so that was pretty attractive. And to think about 3 years of law school, as I used to say, 2 or 3 years as a grunt somewhere in an office, I was thinking, hey, that's going to be 6-7 years before I really start to do things that I consider to be substantive and significant. And I felt like I was doing things currently that were substantive and significant.
Yeah.
And I was really enjoying the people. So maybe that's part of it too. And, Jack Rich at that time was a guy I was spending a tremendous amount of the day with, and he was a super strong Christian guy, but it was incredible business acumen.
Sure, yeah.
And I was learning from him in informative and significant ways, and I thought, this feels really good. This feels like where I need to be. So maybe it was God nudging me to say, hey, there's so many things that are lining up here.
Yeah.
That there's a reason they feel good, and that's because this is where I want you to be. So we decided, hey, let's stay here.
Let's go. Did you always, because you're a finance guy, you're a numbers, money kind of guy, were you always easily able to marry the two, money and following the Lord? Or was there ever because I feel like oftentimes in our culture today, those are kind of combative.
No, that's never been hard for me.
Okay.
Interesting question. I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that. It's always seemed to me to be that there's great synergy. Sometimes I say, if your gift is making money, make all you can.
Sure.
And then do something great with it.
Yeah. Why do you think
something worthwhile?
Why do you think Christians are often against that mentality?
Well, I think there's plenty of scriptural references that talk about the challenges of wealth and the way it can corrupt our motives and our heart, and that we can become so fixated on money and wealth that we lose perspective of our faith and the role and provision. Wealth can be a very protective type thing in our own minds, and in some cases supplant our perceived need for God.
Yeah.
Because we have all we need. We can take care of ourselves, and we have all the money we need to do anything we want. And that's not what God calls us to. He calls us to, if you have the ability to shower your wealth on people and do good with it, that's what the gospel teaches us to do.
Did you ever have a day of reckoning where you were like, oh man, I am putting maybe too much comfort in financial means, or I'm putting too much comfort and control into, because again, you're a money guy. Yeah. So your brain kind of thinks on that term. Did you ever have like a moment of like, okay, hold on, maybe I am putting a little bit too much security in this thing called money? Or has your faith always been able to really freely allow?
I think that's a constant struggle.
Sure.
I mean, I'd say that's been a struggle every day of my life, is to realize that what God calls us to is complete reliance on Him.
Yeah.
That He will be the ultimate provider of everything that we need.
Yeah.
And I still find myself thinking and catching myself thinking, you know what? I'm going down the wrong path here. I'm letting myself try to be sufficient, whether it's with money or solving issues or crafting a solution. I mean, I feel like all my career, what I've done is get into situations and try to solve problems.
Yeah.
And I think God has given me a certain talent for that the world has celebrated.
Yeah.
And that can also really impact your faith in a negative way, because you start to feel self-sufficient. That I have figured out how to do this,
Sure.
and so I have a lot of confidence. And And yet I realize that that's all from God. That God has blessed me, and he's blessed you, and he's blessed everybody with certain unique talents and abilities. But what he calls us to do is use them every single day to do something good, and to trust him that everything we have has been given by him, and he can take it away in a moment, but that he desires to bless us. And so we have that faith, and so I have to remind myself constantly of that, because it's easy to slip back into that mode of self-reliance.
For sure. I think it's awesome to hear your story, that you are well into that aspect of life, but also you understand the fruit of using that as a tool rather than a tool to bless others, rather than a tool for comfort and security that a lot of us,
one story that is relevant here, I think. One of the things that my parents weren't perfect parents, but they did a lot of things really good. And my dad, when I remember on Sunday mornings, there was a pretty big routine in our house. He had this blue chair. He would sit in his upstairs bedroom. All of our bedrooms were upstairs. Living areas were downstairs. And he would sit in his blue chair, and I would hear him going over his sermon. You'd walk down the hall while we were, getting ready for church, and you'd hear him in there, going through it. Well, then when he got done, he would come downstairs, we would eat breakfast, and then he would have all three boys come back up, and often he would write the check for the contribution. I still remember he would write $60 check for the contribution. I didn't have a clue how much money he made. But back then, when those early days when I was 6, 7 years old, which would have been in 1975, 76, he was writing a $60 check. And I remember having conversations sometime with my dad. We would have I'd have a friend who had a lake house who would invite me to go to the lake house for the weekend or whatever, and I'd come home and talk about how much fun I had and say, Dad, could we get a lake house? And he said, well, son, we could, but that's the check I write to church every week. And if we were rather interested in investing that in something else, but we're not. We're interested in investing it in the church, and that's part of what God calls us to do. And so still to this day, here we are, 45 years later, and I can still remember that like it was yesterday. And I think those little things along the way in our lives with people who are influential start to create that sense of what's important and where are the priorities.
That's huge. That's an incredible legacy that your father laid for you. So let's go back a little bit to, so you're coming back to Abilene. You've decided you're not going to go to law school at Baylor. What's after that? What are you doing at that point?
I'm working for Jack Rich. I continue that role.
Okay.
He continues to be promoted here and expand his responsibilities, and I continue to be his right hand. He put me over when I was, I think, 27 as the director of financial aid here at ACU. Threw me over there. I remember the day he walked me over there and introduced me to the rest of the staff in financial aid. It was an office of 12 or 15 people, and he said, this is your new director, and I was terrified. And these people were looking at me like, what in the world
is this kid?
Has he done to us? This kid knows nothing, and I didn't. I knew absolutely nothing. But that led to a long history of, Jack continued to place great confidence in me and continued to mentor me, making sure I was ready, but certainly put me in situations that I wasn't prepared for, and I had to figure out and rely on other people to help me. And that was a great learning experience. And then at some point, Royce Money was the president during all that tenure, and Jack moved into a different role of being the chief investment officer. I moved into his role of executive vice president, and Dr. Money came to me one day and said, hey, we think it'd be a really good idea for you to go and get some advanced degrees.
Okay.
And I said, I'm really having too much fun. I don't really want to go back to school. And he said, no, we really think you need to go back to school.
Being vague, but pointed as well.
And say it was a great opportunity for me. I warmed up to it pretty quickly, and I ended up going to Duke and getting an MBA, and then on to the University of Pennsylvania to get a doctorate in higher education management. And I can be a fairly cerebral guy. I tend to describe myself more as an introvert. I love to learn. I love to be in information and assimilating stuff and content and context. And those were both great experiences. They were hard because I continued to work full time, and I went to school in both an executive MBA and an executive doctorate, which are tailored for people that are continuing to work full time. But I loved it. It was so stimulating. I'd go back and forth to Duke and back and forth to Penn, and each of those programs had its own kind of structure. You'd be there for several days, and in Duke's case, a week at a time, and in Penn's case, 3 days at a time. And then you come back here and you do some stuff in the distance, and I loved every minute of it.
Wow.
And, even the research and the dissertation at Penn.
What year was this? Are you starting to do all this?
Let's see. Duke, I started, I think, in 2003, so I would have been here at that point about 10 years working. And I graduated there in 2005, and I think I took a year off. Royce came back and said, okay, we now want you to go on for a doctorate. And I said, man, I'm tired. I'm going to take a year off. So I took a year off, I think, in 2006, and then 2007, started at Penn and finished that in 2009. And in November of 2000, so I think I graduated in May of 2009, and in November was the deadline to make your candidacy known to be the next president of ACU. So somewhere in 2009 is when Royce announced his retirement, and the search began.
Gotcha.
And they announced a November 1st date for anyone who was interested in being a candidate to submit their name for consideration.
So at what point during this whole process were you like, okay, maybe there's something, maybe there's a reason why
I think I knew, and Royce was open about that.
Okay.
He wasn't telling me you're going to be the next president, but he was saying, hey, part of my job is to ensure that there are viable candidates to take my place.
Okay.
And Phil, I think you have the potential to be a candidate among a pool of people.
Okay.
And so I really want to encourage you to invest in yourself and invest in the university and take these steps to be in that situation so that if you would like to be considered, you can be.
Was that opportunity, even though it was kind of up in the air, there was no guarantees, was the opportunity to become the next president of ACU enticing for you? Or you're like, you know what, I don't know about that, but furthering my education sounds like a great investment of my time, and if that happens, that happens? Or you were like, man, it would be awesome to be able to lead this place that has put so much into me. Where were you in that?
Yeah, I think it was a mix.
Okay.
So there's no doubt, I've been passionate about ACU ever since, I was young. And then when I came here and had my own experience, it reinforced that. So I loved this place.
Yeah.
And I loved my job at that time. I loved the ability I had to contribute to a bigger purpose and mission. And so the idea of possibly being the president was certainly something that was exciting and had tremendous amount of meaning to me, but also was a little bit uncertain. There's parts of that are unnerving and that are a bit scary, and there's so much unknown. Even though I'd watched Royce as his executive vice president for several years, so I was close to the role, and I'd watch it. It's just different.
Sure.
It's not the same thing, and you can't ever understand what it feels like until you're in the role. And I knew enough to know that, and he had shared some of that with me. So it was a tough deal. It was a huge decision point in my life to decide to put my name in that.
Yeah.
And I almost didn't. There were times when I had decided, hey, I don't think this is for me. Or that this is the right next step. And I knew that if I didn't do that, I would probably end up leaving the university, just based on how things typically go in a presidential transition. And you tend to have people that would bring in and assemble a senior leadership team, and I was already part of that. And if there was another president, they would likely and appropriately want to bring in their team.
Their own team, yeah.
And so that was a very grueling period
to
try to discern whether or not this was the right thing.
Yeah, so you put your name in the hat. What was that process like?
It was the most unusual, crazy thing I've ever been through in my life.
How so?
I don't even know if you can describe it, but the optics and the pressure and the visibility and the openness, all of a sudden your life is on the front page in every aspect, and their eyes on you all the time, and they're all evaluative.
Yeah.
As soon as that becomes known. So the first part of the process was behind the scenes. So I guess that part really wasn't as unusual. But at the point, I remember, obviously, the day that the process became public. So there was several weeks, 6-8 weeks of process that were behind-the-scenes interviews, and no one knew who the search committee was talking to.
Okay.
They were talking to a number of candidates, and their job was to whittle it down to a list of finalists. And then I think it was in January, I think, was when. So they've been working since November. In January, that they announced we have 2 finalists, and that was the first point at which the process was public.
Gotcha.
And
so you're not just one of a handful of people. You're one of 2 people.
One of 2, and it was on the front page of the Abilene Reporter News. That is on a Sunday. They announced it publicly on Saturday. The front page picture was of me and the other candidate, and I remember going to church that morning and at Southern Hills and
shaking hands, kissing babies. What are you doing?
Thought,
at that
oh
point?
My goodness, this is taking another. I also remember calling my mom. She didn't know I was in the process because they'd talked about strict confidentiality, but now it was on the front page of the paper. And
did you know it was going to be on the front page of the paper?
No,
or you wake up?
But I mean, you have to assume that it's going to get covered by the news. And so
Sure.
I remember calling her, and I said, "Mom, my dad passed away in 2004.
Okay.
And he would have loved to have seen this because this place was so special to him. But I was talking to her. I said, Mom, I need to tell you something because you're going to hear it pretty quickly, probably later today or if not today, tomorrow. But I am one of the 2 finalists to be the next president of ACU. And that was announced publicly, and it was on the front page of the paper here in Abilene, and I'm sure you're probably going to hear about that. There was this long pause on the phone. And then the first sentence out of her mouth was, "Why'd they pick you?" Everybody needs a little good dose of humility.
Yes, a little humility from old mom. Yeah. Appreciate that.
And then from there, that was what was crazy is all of a sudden you had all these public interviews, public presentations. It was just nonstop for, I guess, about 2 weeks before they made a decision, or 3. And so you'd have meetings with all the academic deans, and you'd have one with all the faculty, and all the faculty and staff, and
both the candidates are doing all this.
And it's an alternating schedule.
So you're sizing this guy up. I don't know who the guy is. I haven't done the research for it, but you're sizing this guy up. Are you thinking, I've got this in the bag? Or are you like, man,
oh no,
he's really clean. He's really good. He knows.
I knew him well. Know him well. Okay. Still, he's an amazing leader, an incredible person, and I honestly thought, hey, I don't have a chance.
Gotcha.
And he would have been a great president of ACU, without a doubt. And so, I think it's again, you have to look at God's provision and Him leading you into things and bringing outcomes that are, for whatever reason, part of His plan.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what happened here.
Yeah.
And it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah.
Every day in this job is meaningful. It's not easy, but every single day is meaningful.
And that was in 2010?
Yeah, so in February of 2010, the board made the decision so that we ended up, after all these interviews and all these campus, we had like 3 days of full campus interviews, public presentations, all this stuff, and then I think it was a week later the board met in February, and they were making the decision. So that was at a hotel in Dallas. The other candidate and I were both there.
Wow.
The board's meeting, and it was the primary purpose of the meeting was to, decide on the next president.
Was Dallas just because that's where most of the board was at?
Yeah, it was easy travel.
Okay.
It
was like a national convention.
The DFW airport Hilton, so they could fly in.
Gotcha.
And, it was easily accessible, and so it was kind of like, I guess, one of those reality TV shows where on Saturday morning, so we had time with the board on Friday, each of us individually. Like a couple hours of sessions, they'd ask questions, and so they were peppering us with different things. And then they met Friday night, late into the night, and then Saturday morning they were ready to make a decision. Yeah. And so I get called. They just say, "Wait in your room, and we'll call you." And so
How nervous are you? Are you nervous? Are you cool?
Oh yeah, I'm. It's the anxiety is just a different feeling.
Okay.
And to say that I wasn't nervous I just wouldn't be telling the truth.
Gotcha.
It was such an unusual time, and all of this had culminated in this one moment. And so I'm in my room, and I get the call that, okay, Phil, we're ready for you to come down. And so I remember going down, and I still can remember exactly the layout of that hotel. I get to the lobby, and to get to the conference area, you go past the lobby, and there's this long hallway, and all the conference rooms are at the end of the hallway. And I start walking down the hallway. The guy at the front desk says, "Hey, they're at the room at the end of the hall." And I'm thinking, that's a long way down. So I start walking.
Got a lot of time to think.
Feel your heart beating out of your head. And still this day is a great story. I'll throw him under the bus here. One of our current trustees, who was a trustee at that point as well, is a guy named Charlie Onstead. Okay. And for whatever reason, he had to leave the meeting early. And I don't know if they've already talked to the other candidate. I don't know. So you have no idea whether you're the first one in, the last one in, what the situation is. You have no idea. So I'm walking down the hall, and all of a sudden, the only other person coming is Charlie Onset. He's leaving as I'm going in. And so we meet about halfway down the hall, and he just looks at me and winks and says, "Congratulations."
You blew it. Man. So all the anxiety, what are you feeling at that moment?
I don't know how you describe that. I was super excited, incredibly nervous, overwhelmed, grateful, emotional. If nothing else, the end of the process was a significant event, just from your own stamina and emotion, all the energy and the rigor that had been through this crazy process months long, and the visibility and the evaluation, and just to know it was coming to an end was a pretty emotional event.
Yeah.
And then to walk in the room, and all the board was in the room, and they stand up and start applauding, and
So you walk in and they start applauding?
Yeah.
That's a pretty epic scene.
It was amazing.
Like, yes.
Yeah.
Did you tell them that Charlie?
I did. In fact, some of them, the only way they'll ever know is if they listen to this podcast. I've not told that story many times.
Wow, that's amazing.
But we're far enough outside of that they wouldn't care now.
A decade ago. So you get the yes. I mean, do you feel, because I remember, I'm a big history guy. I love presidential history, U.S. presidential history, and LBJ described the office of a president. Now, there's a lot of difference between ACU president, president of the United States, but he described the office of the presidency as an awesome burden. Did you feel that?
Sure.
Even though you're smaller scale, I mean, ACU University.
Oh, I feel it every day.
Did you feel okay? So
Yeah.
how does that look like for you?
I think there's a blessing and a burden of leadership.
Yeah.
And the blessing is you get to influence a lot of things
Yeah.
in leadership, and you get to see and experience things that a lot of people don't get that experience. Some of the relationships that I have, the inner workings and watching plans come together, that sometimes everybody doesn't have that same vantage point. So I feel so incredibly blessed, and it's such an honor to get to see from my vantage point the way that God provides and opens doors of opportunity, brings people together, and enables progress to happen that is glorifying to Him. Yeah. And it's so overwhelming sometimes. And I wish every employee at ACU, if there was some way for me to be able to show them some of the things that I get to see. I try to describe them sometimes, but it's not the same as experiencing and being able to see it. And you realize that's a really unusual and unique perspective that it's hard to share.
Yeah.
And so that's an incredible blessing. The burden is, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You feel the weight of leadership.
Yeah.
You realize the decisions that you make are significantly impactful. You realize that the mistakes that you make have ramifications on a lot of people, and I make a lot of them. I've made a lot of them. And while you want to be perfect, you're not.
Yeah.
And you're reminded constantly in roles of leadership, daily almost, about your faults, about your shortcomings, about your failures. And that's a hard place to be. And it's, I think, part of what's beautiful about that, at least from my perspective, is that is one of the most significant and profound ways to experience the grace and the healing power of Jesus, is that you have no choice but to face the worst of who you are, because it's constantly being put in front of you in roles of leadership, and you realize that that's okay because I don't have to be perfect. God has provided for me, and He's going to fill in all the gaps in what He needs me to do. He doesn't ever expect me to be perfect. What He expects me to do is be faithful and to trust Him to lead forward and always do what I think is the right thing. Yeah. And that's been one of the most amazing parts of my faith journey, is to figure out and how to embrace that and really let that go.
Yeah. So you touched earlier on this aspect of suddenly you're a nominee, it's public knowledge, front news of the newspaper, and suddenly there's all this public attention, all this public weight. And then now discussing kind of the aspect of the responsibility that you have over a university, and the failures are not just tiny failures. They're now well-known, humongous failures. What has that been like to be a public figure and also under the scrutiny of public opinion for your failures? We can talk about personal failures, but also failures of, as a leader of a university. What has it been like for you to have to bear the weight of public opinion of your personal failures?
Yeah, early on. So I realize I'm in my 11th year in this role, and as I mentioned before, there's no substitute for experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm in a completely different place than I was, but that's part of the beautiful journey that God provides for. That His provision is always sufficient. Something I say often, and I've seen it over and over again. I think early on, and I made some pretty big mistakes early on, significant mistakes. It was so hard for me to separate the criticism of my leadership from my value of myself as a person. That's hard probably for most leaders.
Yeah.
And you realize too that people, it's human nature when you deserve to be criticized. Oftentimes you're getting criticized you don't deserve to be. That's also part of leadership. But the point is, when you do get criticized, whether it's justified or not, it tends to move beyond the practical issue-oriented criticism to the personal. I mean, that's just human nature. People attack you as a person.
Yeah.
They'll question your motives. They'll question your character, your honesty, and things that get to the heart of who each of us are as people.
Yeah. And
so it took me a long time, I guess 5-6 years, to figure out how to be able to separate those two and realize that people, they don't necessarily mean to be mean, and they weren't really trying to attack me as a person, but that's part of what comes with the territory.
Yeah.
And so you realize that it's not about me.
Yeah.
It's part of that realization that God helps us see that's part of His plan to say, hey, the reason this hurts so bad is because I'm making this about me. It's not about me. It's about me being willing to put myself in this position to do what God wants for His plan, and I'm nothing more than a facilitator. And when I can get outside myself and realize it's not about me, guess what? All that criticism starts to have a completely different feel.
Yeah.
And also learned early on that in leadership you make lots of mistakes, as I mentioned, and first thing you got to do is own them.
Yeah.
Just get right up in front of people and say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I messed up here.
Yeah.
I want to ask for your forgiveness, or I want to tell you I'm sorry, and I want to ask you to come with me to help make this right.
Yeah.
That's also not easy.
Yeah.
And it's taken a little bit of experience and miles of the road to kind of figure out, hey, that's part of what we're called to do. And so all that together, I think, man, I've been so blessed to be in a role of leadership, to have to navigate those type of currents of my stream of life, because it's formed me as a person. Yeah. And I've loved every moment of that, even though it hadn't been comfortable.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's interesting for you to phrase it that your responsibilities has pushed you into this necessity of, honestly, humility is what you're describing, that a lot of us miss out on because our flaws aren't, all of our flaws aren't exposed to front page newspaper. Our personal decisions aren't all out there for everyone to see. So we kind of get this coverage of security and privacy. But it's awesome to see that in the midst of you going through public difficulties, personally as a leader, it's actually forced you to be a healthier human, a healthier man by leaning more into the Lord first and foremost, but also like learning the skill sets of humility and apologizing, which I think are huge. And it's really interesting to hear how your journey has led you there. So moving on from the heavy stuff, what are some greatest successes? What are you most proud of as president? We're kind of running out of time, but I want to hear maybe what, as you look back the last 10, 11 years of being the president of ACU and your own journey, what are you most proud of? And it could be as president, it could be as a husband, it could be as a dad. What are you most proud of? Well,
since this is mostly focused on ACU, I'll talk about it from that perspective. I'm just the thing I'm most proud of. I mean, we could look around at all the new buildings we've built, the growth in the university, the significant strength of our endowment. All those are great things that most universities measure their health by.
Yeah.
How many students do you have? How big is your endowment? How many programs have you launched? How many buildings have you built? How much money have you raised? And by all of those measures, ACU has so outperformed the market. It's been unbelievable. And those are things I'm proud of. But you know what I'm most proud of? The way that this community, starting with the faculty and staff who choose to be here, the way that they live out the mission of this place every single day in such an incredibly authentic way, keeping the focus of our faith as a community right at the center of what they do. The way they love our students, the way they reach out, invest in their personal lives and in their journey, and it's unending. And so you even look at this last year. This last year has been the best year for me as a leader of ACU ever, because through all the hardship of the pandemic, the crazy storm we just experienced, it was like just this illuminating light was shining on the unwavering commitment of our faculty and staff to do absolutely whatever was necessary to protect the special things about this place, care for our students, adjust their courses, get outside their comfort zone, reimagine how we do things. And it's all because they say this is important.
Yeah.
This is special. Yeah. God has called us to be difference makers in the world. And when that comes under threat, we're willing to do whatever it takes to try to figure that out. And they've done it. And there's no way that you could convince me that that type of spirit and commitment and resolve and tenacity exists on any other campus, college campus, university campus in the country like it does here. And it's all because they're people of faith who absolutely know that God has called them to this place to make a difference, and they're unwavering in their commitment to figure out how to make a difference tomorrow, no matter what the climate and circumstance may be.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I'm more proud of that than anything else that we have.
That's so awesome. So before we end this thing, what's next for you? What's next for Phil Schubert in the future? What are your goals? What are your dreams as you move forward from here? What's next?
If the board doesn't fire me, which is always a possibility in every board meeting. We just had a board meeting last week, and Royce Money used to tell me that the mark of a successful board meeting is you come out of it with a job.
With a job. That's
so
amazing.
I do still have a job. Got an amazing board. By the way, April Anthony is our chair. She's fantastic. We have so many huge mountains that we're getting ready to start climbing that are so exciting, that the university is so well positioned to take that it's going to be an awesome experience. So we're in the process of finalizing a major capital campaign. It'll probably be a $250 million campaign that will outline several key areas of priority and growth and maturity for the institution. These are things that have never been attainable for us at ACU in the past, but it's because of God's provision and putting us where we are, allowing us to grow and mature and strengthen in all these different ways that have opened some of the most amazing doors of opportunity, put ACU in a place for us to have an impact on a national stage unlike we've ever had before as we grow into a national university, into a research-based university while keeping our students right at the center of everything that we do. And it's going to position us to broaden our influence and deepen our impact in ways that we've never seen before. And I cannot wait to continue leading down that path.
That's awesome. I'm excited to see where this university goes, and I'm really grateful for your time here today, but really just grateful for the example you've set as a leader of this organization and the pace that you have set in this community as well, and moving forward, and also tying that into faith and passions and journey and family and all those things. So
appreciate
thank you for that.
Thanks for having me today.
So yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.